American Politics Today by Bianco and Canon, Chapter 7, Part 1. Political Parties. How do political parties organize American politics? Our diversity is our strength. Our unity is our power. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. I've got news for the Republican establishment. I've got news for the Democratic establishment. They can't stop us. Senator Bernie Sanders. The power and limits of American political parties are best illustrated by the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination contest. Over a dozen candidates ran serious, well-funded campaigns beginning over a year before the first caucus in Iowa. None of them, not even billionaire Mike Bloomberg, seriously considered running as an independent. The rules of the contest were set by the Democratic National Committee, which even decided which candidate would appear in DNC-sponsored debates. There was an extensive live coverage of the party's presidential nomination convention in August 2020, including the acceptance speech by the winner of the contest, former Vice President Joe Biden. At the same time, many critics argued that the nomination process was drawn out and highlighted divisions between liberals and moderates in the party that will complicate Democratic policy initiatives over the next 2 years. The 2020 nomination contest is an example of what political scientist Julia Azaria calls strong partisanship, weak parties. On the one hand, decades of the research have shown that most Americans have long-term attachment to one of the major parties, and that this attachment shapes their political behavior, even if they say they're voting for the better candidate rather than according to their party identification. Parties that organize elections through President Trump campaigned in 2016 as a political outsider. He won the presidency as the candidate of the Republican Party. And once candidates are elected to office, parties are also players in the legislative process. Congressional party leaders such as Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell or House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi during the 116th Congress are important spokespeople and deal makers. In these ways, parties unify and mobilize disparate groups, simplify their choices that voters face, and bring efficiency and coherence to government policy making. Chapter goals. At the same time, American political parties seem unable to carry through on their promises while Joe Biden won the nomination. There were doubts about whether he would be able to reach policy compromises and gain the support of the more progressive side of the party that had been excited about the policy proposals championed by Bernie Sanders, including Medicare for all, progressive side of party had been excited about the policy championed by Bernie Sanders, including Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, a free higher education, and as Sanders' quote indicates, he made no secret of his opposition to both party organizations. But Biden is not the first nominee to receive these criticisms. Many Democrats had doubts about Senator Hillary Clinton's electability in 2016. And even though Donald Trump ran that year on promises to fully repeal Obamacare, build a wall at the Mexican border, and reform federal welfare programs, he was largely unsuccessful. Even with the Republican control of the presidency and both houses of Congress, after his election in 2016, congressional Democrats were similarly unable to deliver on their pledge to remove President Trump from office through impeachment, despite winning majority control of the House of Representatives in the 2018 midterms. Given the diversity of the House Democrats, Party leaders face a daunting task in trying to build unity around controversial policy initiatives. Many Americans report that they dislike both major parties, even the one they identify with. Our task in this chapter is to understand that American political parties can simultaneously be strong and weak, or influential, yet disliked and irrelevant. Why is it impossible to describe American politics without talking about Republicans and Democrats? At the same time, why do the parties seem like bystanders as nominees are chosen and policies are debated? What are the political parties, and where did today's parties come from? Political parties are organizations that run candidates for political office and coordinate the actions of officials. Elected under the party banner, looking around the world, we find many different kinds of parties. In numerous Western European countries, the major political parties have millions of dues-paying members, and party leaders control whether their elected officials do. These countries typically have several major parties competing for office. In contrast, candidates in many new democracies run as representatives of a party, but party leaders have no control over what candidates say during the campaign or how they act in office. America's two major political parties, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, lie somewhere between these extremes. However, rather than being unified organizations with party leaders at the top, candidates and party workers in the middle, and citizen members at the bottom, American political parties are decentralized, each one a loose network of organizations, groups, and individuals who share a party label but are under no obligation to work together. The party organization is the structure of national, state, and local parties, including party leaders and workers. The party in government is made up of the politicians who are elected as candidates as the party, and at the party in the electorate includes all the citizens who identify with the party. For example, the Republican Party National Organization, the RNC, functions independently of Republican leaders in government, like Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell during the 116th Congress. Neither one is in charge of the other. Although McConnell is the leader of Republican senators, he cannot tell them what to do. While McConnell's colleagues may be somewhat sympathetic to his arguments, they are under no obligation to do what he asks. Moreover, while many Americans think of themselves as member of a political party, someone who identifies with the Republican Party is not obligated to work for or give money to the party or to vote for its candidates. As you will see, organization matters. The fact that American political parties are split into three parts has important implications for what they do and for their impact on the nation's politics. The Republican and Democratic parties have existed for a long time. The Republicans since 1854 and the Democrats since the early 1800s. Over this time, the parties have been transformed in every respect except their names. These changes are the first important clue about the nature of American political parties. There is nothing inevitable about what the parties stand for. The types of candidates who run under each party's banner and the groups that support each party. The sharply polarized parties in today's America did not exist a generation ago. American political parties may look very different in the future. The Republican and Democratic parties have survived throughout most of American history, even though they often have not been very popular. Even among their supporters, their survival is partly due to state and local laws that make it easier for candidates to get on the ballot if they run as a majority party candidate. Both parties also work to find good candidates and raise money for their campaigns. In addition, the fact that American elects office holders from states or geographic districts makes it harder for new parties to form, keeping the two existing parties in place. As a result, known as the DeVarger's Law, political scientists use the term party systems to describe periods when the major parties names their groups of supporters and the issues dividing them have all been constant. The beginning and end years that we use throughout this section are approximate. As Table 7.1 shows, there have been 6 party systems in America. For each party system, the table gives the names of the two major parties, indicates which party dominated, that is, won the most presidential elections or controlled Congress, and describes the principles, issues dividing the parties. The evolution of American political parties. While most of the founders held a dim view of political parties, many of them participated in the formation of such parties soon after the founding of the United States. The Federalists and the Democratic Republicans were primarily parties in government that consisted of like-minded legislators. Federalists wanted a strong central government and a national bank. Democratic Republicans took the opposition positions. These political parties were quite different from their modern counterparts. In particular, there were no national party organizations. Few citizens thought of themselves as party members, and candidates for office did not campaign as representatives of a political party. Even so, the goals of those who developed these parties were similar to the goals of party leaders today. Like-minded individuals banded together to help enact their preferred policies and defeat their opponents. I'm going to pause real quick so that you may look at the 7.1. For 2 decades, the two parties were more or less evenly matched in Congress. Although the Federalists did not win a presidential contest after 1800, however, in the 1814 elections, Federalist legislators who had opposed the War of 1812 and supported a politically unpopular pay raise for members of Congress lost most of their congressional seats. These defeats led to the era of good feelings, when there was only one political party, the Democratic Republican Party. Following the election of President Andrew Jackson in 1828, this party became known as the Democratic Party. At the same time, another new party, the Whig Party, was formed in opposition to Democratic policy priorities, beginning in the second party system. The new Democratic Party cultivated electoral support by building organizations to mobilize citizens and bind them to the party. The operations of the party reflected 2 new concepts: the party principle, the idea that a party is not just a group of elected officials, but an organization that exists apart from its candidates, and the spoils system, whereby party workers were rewarded with benefits such as federal jobs. In the 1840s, the issue of slavery split the second party system, leading to a third party system. Most Democratic politicians either supported slavery outright or wanted to avoid debating the issue. The Whig Party was split up between abolitionists who wanted to end slavery and politicians who agreed with Democrats, ultimately anti-slavery. Whigs left the party and formed the Republican Party, which also attracted anti-slavery. Democrats leading to the demise of the Whig Party. This move divided the country into a largely Republican Northeast, a largely Democratic South, and politically split Midwestern and border states. Even after the Civil War, the Republicans and Democrats remained the two prominent national parties. The parties were divided over whether the federal government should help farmers, and rural residents or inhabitants of rapidly expanding cities, and whether it should regulate America's rapidly growing industrial base. Democrats built a coalition of rural and urban voters by proposing a larger, more active federal government and other policies that would help both groups. A similar shift occurred during the transition to the fourth party system, in which the parties were divided on the government's response to industrialization and restrictions on immigration. There were also significant moves during this time in expanding who was eligible to vote, although women did not gain this right until the early 20th century, and minorities were generally barred by combination of laws and practices until the 1960s. The fifth party system was born out of the Great Depression. Many Republicans argued that conditions would improve over time and that government intervention would do little good, while Democrats proposed new government programs that would help people in need and spur economic growth. The Democratic landslide in the 1932 elections led to the New Deal, a series of federal programs designed to stimulate the national economy, help needy people, and impose a variety of new regulations. Debate over the New Deal brought together the New Deal coalition of African Americans, Catholics, Jews, Union members, and white Southerners who became strong supporters of Democratic candidates over the next generation. This transformation established the basic division between the parties that exists to the present day. Democrats generally favor a large federal government that takes an active role in managing the economy and regulation behavior, while Republicans generally believe that many such programs should be provided by state and local governments or not provided at all. A sixth party system emerged as a new political question as debates divided the parties. Beginning in the late 1940s, many Democratic candidates and party leaders, particularly outside the South, came out against the separate but equal system of racial discrimination in Southern states and in favor of programs designed to ensure equal opportunity for minority citizens. Then during the 1960s, many Democratic politicians argued, for example, expanding the role of the federal government into health care, anti-poverty programs, and education. Most Republicans opposed these initiatives, although a significant portion did not. At the same time, these new issues also began to divide American citizens and organized groups, leading to a gradual but significant shift in the groups that identified with each party. White Southerners and some Catholics moved to the Republican Party, and minorities, particularly African Americans, started identifying more strongly as Democrats. Democrats also gained supporters in New England and West Coast states. By the late 1980s, all three elements of the Republican and Democratic parties, organization, government, and electorate, were much more like-minded than they had been a generation earlier, a trend that continues to the present day. Broadly speaking, Democrats tend to favor a larger government that provides more benefits to citizens and regulates corporate and individual behavior, while Republicans advocate for a small government that does less. However, there are exceptions to these rules. On many social issues such as abortion and LGBTQ rights, most Democrats favor individual choice and equality, while most Republicans favor limits on abortion and oppose equality for the same-sex couples on issues such as marriage and adoption. Moreover, as the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination contest demonstrates, issues such as expanding government, provided health care, divide candidates and their supporters within each party. Realignments. Each party system is separated from the next by a realignment, a change in one or more of the factors that define a party system. These factors include the issues that divide the parties, the nature and function of the party organizations, the composition of the party coalitions, and the specific issues divide the parties, the nature and function of the party organization, the composition of the party coalitions, and the specifics of government policy. Early work on realignments argued that realignments began with the emergence of a new question or issue debate that captured the attention of large numbers of ordinary citizens, activists, and politicians. For example, as noted, the fifth party system, 1933 to 1968, was born during the Great Depression, when the parties were primarily divided by their positions on the appropriate size of the federal government. American political parties today. We've seen that almost from the beginning, political parties have been a central feature of American politics. The next steps are to examine the different aspects: the party organization, the party in the government, and the party in the electorate of the American political parties, describe the role they play in elections and in government, and understand how their organization and operations shape American democracy. The party organization. The principal body in each party organization is the National Committee. The Democratic National Committee or the Republican National Committee, which consists of representatives from state party organizations, usually one man and one woman per state. The state party organizations, in turn, are made up of professional staff plus thousands of party organizations at the country, city, and town levels. The job of these organizations is to run the party's day-to-day operations, recruit candidates and supporters, raise money for future campaigns, and work to build a consensus on major issues. Both national party committees include a number of constituency groups. The Democrats' term or teams, the Republicans' term. These organizations within the party work to attract the support of demographic groups considered likely to share the party's issue concerns, such as African Americans, Latinos, people with strong religious beliefs, senior citizens, women, and many others, and assist in fundraising. Each party organization also includes groups designed to build support for or coordinate the efforts of particular individuals or politicians. These groups include the Democratic and the Republican Governors Associations, the Young Democrats, the Young Republicans, and more specialized groups such as the Republicans Lawyers Organization or the Democratic Leadership Council, the DLC, an organization of moderate Democratic politicians. Other allied groups, many other groups such as political action committees, the PACs or 527 organizations, labor unions, and other interest groups and organizations are loosely affiliated with one of the major parties. For example, the organization MoveOn.org typically supports the Democratic candidates. Similar organizations on the Republican side include the Club for Growth, Americans for Prosperity, Crossroads GPS, and many evangelical groups. Though these groups often favor one party over the other, they are not in part of the party organization and do not always agree with the party's positions or support its candidates. In fact, many have to operate independently of the parties and their candidates in order to preserve their tax-exempt status. For more details on campaign finance, see Chapter 8 and 9. As this description suggests, the party organization has a fluid structure rather than a rigid hierarchy. Individuals and groups work with a party's leaders and candidates when they share the same goals, but unless they are paid party employees, they are under no obligation to do so. Even paid party workers can quit rather than work for a candidate or a cause they oppose. This strong support for President Trump from within the Republican Party organization was partly due to departures, both voluntary and forced, of party workers and officials who opposed Trump's nominations and his policies. Party brand names. The Republican and Democratic Party organizations have well-established brand names because the parties stand for different things in terms of both their preferred government policies and their ideological leanings. The party names themselves become a shorthand way of providing information to voters about the party's candidates. Hearing the term Democrat or Republican calls to mind ideas about what kinds of positions the members of each party support, what kinds of candidates each party runs, and how these candidates will probably vote if they are elected to office. Citizens can use these brand names as a cue to decide whom to vote for in an election. See Chapter 8 for more information about voting cues. Limits on party organization. One critical thing to understand about the Democratic and Republican Party organizations is that they are not hierarchies. No one person or group in charge determines what either organization does, which often makes them look disorganized. Within the RNC and the DNC, the party organization's positions are set not to by the committee chair, but by the RNC or DNC members from all 50 states. If the committee chair and the committee disagree, the chair cannot force the committee members to do what he or she wants. The National Party Organization is also unable to force state and local parties to share its positions on issues or comply with other requests. State and local parties make their own decisions about state and local level candidates and issue positions. The National Committee can ask nicely, cajole, or even threaten to withhold funds, although such threats are rare. But if a state party organization or independent group, or even an individual candidate disagrees with the National Committee, there's little the National Committee can do to force compliance. The party and government. The party and government consists of elected officials holding national, state, and local offices who have taken office as candidates or of a particular party. They are the public face of the party, somewhat like the player on a sports team. Although players are the only part of the sports franchise, along with owners, coaches, trainers, and support staff, the players' identities are the most people call to mind when they think of the team. Because the party in government is made up of office holders, it has a direct impact on government policy. Members of the party organization can recruit candidates, write platforms, and pay for campaign ads. But only those who win elections, that is, the party in government, serve as members of Congress or as executive officials, and actually propose, debate, vote on, and sign the legislation that determines what government does. Caucuses and conferences. In the House and Senate, the Democratic and Republican parties are organized around working groups called caucus, Democrats, and a conference, Republicans. The party caucus or conference serves as a forum for the debate, compromise, and strategizing among the party's elected officials. Under unified government, in which the same party controls Congress and the presidency, these discussions focus on finding common ground within the party, as in the negotiations that led to the Republican tax cut legislation in 2016, which was enacted without Democratic support under divided government, in which one party controls at least one house of Congress and the other party controls the presidency. As in 2019 to 2020, the focus changes on finding opportunities to work with the other party or strategizing on how to block the other party's initiatives. Divided government was relatively rare before the 1960s, but has become increasingly common since then. Particularly when control is divided, partisan differences can yield policy gridlock, as neither side is willing to compromise and neither side has the vote to push its preferred package through. Measures such as the economic stimulus legislation enacted rapidly in response to the COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020 are very much the exception to the rule. Each party's caucus or conference also meets to decide on legislative committee assignments, leadership positions on committees, and leadership positions within the caucus or conference. Caucus or conference leaders serve as spokespeople for their respective parties, particularly when the president is from the other party. The party in government also contains groups that recruit and support candidates for political office. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, the DSCC, the National Republican Congressional Committee, the NRCC, and the National Republican Senatorial Committee, the NRSC. I will pause this, so feel free if you need to pause this to read this. Hopefully you can read it. Here's figure 7.1, party ID trends. Polarization and ideological diversity. The modern Congress is polarized in both houses. Both the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats hold different views on government policy. The graph in the What Do We the Facts Say features tells us that over the last 60 years, the magnitude of ideological differences between the parties in Congress has increased. Up until the 1980s, there was some overlap between the parties in Congress has increased. I'm sorry, I reread that. Up until the 1980s, there was some overlap between the positions of Democrats and Republicans, but this overlap has disappeared. In recent years, however, if we expanded the figure to look at the ideologies of individual members, we'd find a mixture of ideologies, not a uniform consensus opinion. In the contemporary Congress, Democrats vary from the relative liberal left end of the scale to the moderate middle and even somewhat conservative right end. The same is true for Republican members of Congress. While most are conservative, there are some moderates as well as a range of conservative opinions. The ideological diversity within each party in government can create situations in which a caucus or a conference is divided on a policy question. Compromise within parties' working group is not inevitable. Even though legislators share a party label, they may not be able to find a common ground. In the last few years, congressional Republicans have been divided on issues such as immigration, healthcare, taxation, and spending levels, and the federal budget deficit. Differences between the parties are present on virtually all major issues. With the support for the bipartisan COVID-19 legislations being a rare exception, the party in the electorate consists of citizens who identify with a particular political party. Most Americans say they are either Democrats or Republicans. Although the percentage has declined slightly over the last 2 generations, party identification, or party ID, is a critical variable in understanding votes and other forms of political participation. Party ID. To say you identify with a party is a personal orientation or decision that does not commit you to anything, nor does it give you any control over a party's action. Although the Republicans and the Democrats have websites where people can sign up to receive email alerts and contribute online to party causes, joining a party does not give a citizen any direct influence over what the party does. Rather, the party leaders and the candidates themselves make the day-to-day decisions. These individuals often heed citizens' demands, but there is no requirement that they do so. Real participation in party operation is open to citizens who become activists by working for a party organization or one of its candidates. Activists contributions vary widely and may include stuffing envelopes, helping out with a phone bank, being a delegate to a party convention, attending campaign rallies, or campaigning door to door. Figure 7.1 gives data on party ID in America. From 1992 to 2020, measured when respondents were given the option to say whether they were a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. Over this time period, the parties have been nearly evenly split. At various times in the past, one party has opened some advantage over the other, as the Democrats did in the early 2000s. But there is no consistent trend. Looking more closely at vote decisions, we see that figure 7.2 shows how Democrats, Republicans, and independents voted in the 2020 election. Here's figure 7.2. Closest partisan. Independents are grouped with the party they actually affiliate with. This figure that if you are trying to predict how someone will vote, the most important thing to know is his or her party ID. Over 90% of Democrats voted for Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee, and about the same percentage of Republicans voted for Donald Trump. Party coalitions. Data on party ID enables scholars to determine the party coalitions, or groups of citizens who identify with each party, as well as the nature of disagreements between the parties. Here's figure 7.4. The contemporary Republican and Democratic Party coalitions differ systematically. In terms of their policy preferences, what they want government to do, as shown in figure 7.3, this data indicate the extent to which partisans disagree about the relative importance of issues such as providing health insurance to the uninsured, addressing global warming, and strengthening the military. These differences hammer home the idea that party labels are meaningful. If you know someone is a Republican or a Democrat, the information tells you something about what that person probably wants government to do and how he or she will likely vote in the next election. These differences also create opportunities for issues ownership. Candidates from a party tend to concentrate their campaigns on issues that are part of their party's brand names and ignore issues that belong to the other party. These policy disagreements reflect sharp differences in the composition of the party coalitions. As shown in figure 7.4, as you can see, some groups are disproportionately likely to identify as Democrats. African Americans, some are disproportionately likely to identify as Republicans. White evangelicals, and other groups have no clear favorite party. Women born before 1945. Again, these coalitions have shifted over time. For example, the Republican advantage among white Southerners and white evangelical Protestants has existed only since the 1980s. This is the end of Chapter 7, Part 1.